Hello, so in this video, we are going to be ideally mastering confusables. Okay, so confusables, just as like what the word sounds like, can be confusing. Okay, so what are confusables? They are words that sound or look similar, but they have different meanings. Okay, this is something that's particularly challenging if English is not your first language, just because this is not a common thing amongst all other languages. There are some confusables in other languages, but English especially has tons and tons of confusables. And until you really 100% know the language, it's very easy to mistake them and use the wrong ones. Okay. So, kind of before we even jump in, some examples that will hopefully maybe get you more situated with what confusables are like there, and there, right? There's three different types of theirs. They all mean something different. Effect versus effect. They sound very similar, they look very similar, and they're oftenly used incorrectly. Two and two, that's a whole other realm that a lot of people struggle with and are easily confused on. And so, without me continuing on saying a whole bunch of different confusables, can you think of any confusable words that you've struggled with? Maybe some that I even mentioned, you're still like, I don't even know what these mean. I don't know which one I should use in this instance, right? Go ahead, think about what some confusables are that you personally have struggled with. Even as an English teacher, it was just up until very recently where I definitely struggled with some different confusables. I would say I graduated high school without probably knowing when to use the proper to or even there, simply because it's difficult, it's tricky, and unless you really spend time practicing it, it's something that is really challenging to kind of conquer and become really great at. So, why are these confusables important, and why am I taking my time teaching you this? The first thing is that proper use shows advanced language proficiency. When you can use the correct word when you are supposed to, it shows that you're educated. It shows that you know what you are trying to say, and incorrect use can change the meaning of what you are trying to say, what your message means. Okay, so kind of those go hand in hand, right? You want to seem educated, you want to seem like you know how to write in English, and when you don't write it correctly, as the second bullet mentions, it shows that it can change the meaning of what you are trying to say. Okay, so mastering confusables, it improves your writing and speaking skills in the future when you are writing emails. It can definitely just make you seem a little bit more educated, even in your Instagram bios, for example. You want to use the correct your, you want to use the correct there, you want to use the correct to. So when someone who is educated and does know this, they are able to recognize the fact that, hey, you also know this, you also are educated, and you also have good proficiency in English. So, we're going to start off with diving into two, and two. So, I think a lot of students probably have mastered the two with the W, and that's the number, but we're going to go ahead and start with the front, and that is the simple TO. Okay, so two is a preposition, meaning that it's used in a sentence to show a relationship between like a noun and an object or a pronoun, and some other part of the sentence. Okay, so, to the store, she went to the store. That would be to as a preposition, or it's also used as part of an infinitive, which kind of just join or is added before a verb. So, to run, to bike, to jog. That is when you would use this form of just to. Excuse me. Um, the two with the double O is uh, used to explain the word also, right? So they could be interchanged with also, or when something is excessive, meaning there's a lot of it, okay? So I like that two is double O because that could be used interchangeably with I like that also, okay? You would also use the double O2 when something is excessive, like that is too much, or it is raining too hard out. Anything that is too much, right? It's excessive. you're going to have to take that extra excessive step and add that extra O. That's kind of how I've always remembered it, is remembering that if there's too much, we have to add that extra O because it's too much. We got to add an extra to make it work. All right. And then also knowing that it's interchangeable with the word also. So I like that too, is the example I've given here. Then we have the number 2, as I mentioned before, and that is just the number. That is just something you're going to have to memorize and remember. But go ahead. I want you to create a sentence using all 3 words correctly. So that means one sentence with all 3 twos. Go ahead and give it your best shot. We are now going to move on to there, and there. This is a very big struggle. Wow. This is a very big struggle with a lot of my students, and understandably so. I think this is something even I personally struggled with for a long time, but we're going to go ahead and break it down. So there, when it's spelled like Their, and there's that I in there, it's a possessive pronoun, meaning that there's something of ownership. Okay. So their car is red. That car is owned by somebody. And the way that I remember that this one shows possessiveness or possession is the I. The I represents like me, a person. So their car, their book, their whatever, right, is in possession of somebody. And that's how I remember with the I is a person. It's just a quick trick or tool that I've used. Hopefully it can maybe be beneficial to you. We then have there without the I, and it's just There. I would say this is like the default there that everybody uses, meaning that like if you don't know when you should use the other theirs, this is the one that people use. But really, you should only use it when you're talking about location or existence. Okay, so the book is over there, or there are 5 apples. This one, although it is the default, I think a good way that I've been able to understand the different theirs is by really knowing that there with the I is a possessive pronoun, and then that this there is a contraction of they are. So kind of like a process of elimination approach is what I've taken and been successful with. Or if you're able to remember that this there is only used when talking about like a location or existence, that is then awesome and great for you. Okay. So we have there, which shows possession. We have this there, which shows location or existence. And then we have the contraction of they and are, which is this there. And that's just used anytime that you are saying they are, but combining them. So they're going to the park. This is the correct there because you could swap it out with they are going to the park, and that is still functional and still grammatically correct. So that's kind of the test for using this there. If you could swap it out with for the 2 separate words, they and are, then this is the correct there for you to use. So I just mentioned a whole bunch of different tricks that I use. Go ahead, think on your own. What tricks can you use to remember the differences? Or do you use tricks already that you've been successful with? Go ahead and answer that question. What tricks can you use to remember the differences? All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to your and your. So just as the there with Their is a possessive, your, when it's used without the apostrophe, is also going to be a possessive, and it's just the possessive form of you. So this would then be used in an instance when you could be asking, is this your book, right? Are you in possession of this book? Anytime it's talking about possession, you're going to use that form of your. And then when you use the apostrophe, that's going to be the contraction of the 2 words you and are, just as like in our previous slide, we talked about they and are. You use that apostrophe to kind of glue those 2 words together. So you're very kind. We know that we are using the correct your here because we're able to split it up to you are very kind, and it's still saying the same message. And this contraction is sufficient, right? And kind of combining those 2 words together and making the complement of you are very kind, right? So you're very kind is using the contraction of you and are, therefore you use this your. So tip, as I just mentioned, if you can replace it with you are, you need to use your with an apostrophe. Okay, so the contraction version. just as we did previously, go ahead and create two sentences, one using your as a possessive, right? So that's the your, and then a separate sentence using your with the contraction of you are. Okay, so go ahead. This is two separate sentences instead of writing one sentence using all of the confusables. Go ahead, write your two sentences. Now, moving along to its and its. So, it's without the apostrophe is the possessive form of it. This is really complicated for some students because when we talk about possession, we typically talk about using an apostrophe. But when we are dealing with it as a possessive, you're going to just add the S, and it is not going to be something that needs the apostrophe to kind of show the possession. It just automatically has the possession when you have it spelt out like ITS. Okay. So the dog wagged its tail. There's no apostrophe here because, right, as I mentioned, when it's spelt like ITS, no apostrophe, that is the possessive form already. You do not need that apostrophe to show possession when it comes to the word it. Okay. The contraction uses the apostrophe, and that is of the words it is or it has. Okay. So when it has an apostrophe, it is something that could be broken down to it is or it has, right? So it's raining could be broken down to it is raining. Or it's been a long day can be broken down to it has been a long day. When you use your apostrophe here, that's going to show either the contraction of it is or it has. It is not going to show the possession. That's a tricky rule in the English language simply because most times when you use an apostrophe like this right after the word, it does show possession. Okay. But as a reminder, the possession of it, or if you want to use it in a possessive way, you do not need that apostrophe. Okay. So remember, it's always means it is or it has. And that's kind of just the best way to remember that when you're dealing with it's, when there's that apostrophe there, you have to remember that it's a contraction of either it is or it has. Now, go ahead, right? Think about how can you test which one to use in a sentence. I just mentioned it, right, while talking, but it's also up on the slide. Go ahead, think about how can you test which one to use in a sentence. What's going to go through your head to make sure you're using the correct form of its, right? And not really let it be a true confusable to you because you'll know the difference. Go ahead, think about it, write your answer down. All right, and here we are moving on to affect and effect. This is something that is very tricky. And I would say there's probably even a lot of English teachers out there that might not even really know how to explain the exact difference between affect and effect. Okay, so affect, when it's spelt like with an A, it's a verb meaning to influence ultimately. And effect is going to be the term that's probably most often used in any instance unless you're talking about like a side effect. Okay. So, for example, what I have here is the weather affects my mood, right? It is acting as a verb, right? It's an action of what something causes. All right. So, affect, right? It's usually a verb meaning to influence something. And then we have effect with a E, and this is a noun meaning result. So, effect you're going to use when you're talking about like a side effect, right? Or a specific effect of something. Um, and it's used as a noun, but it's not used when influencing. Okay. So a tip that I have is effect is an action, and then effect is the end result. As I mentioned earlier, effect is more used. And I want you to just kind of think about making sure you use the term effect with a E when you're talking about a side effect or like an end result. All right. So we we have gone over a whole bunch of different terms and confusables that have definitely been confusing, but these two especially, right, can maybe be a little bit problematic if you confuse them and if you use the wrong one. So go ahead, can you think of a situation where confusing these would be problematic. Go ahead, think about it. So what comes to mind for me is talking about like either the medical setting, like if a doctor or a nurse were to mix up these two, it can create pretty large confusion amongst patients, or even in the legal realm, using the wrong effect in these instances, once again, can kind of create confusion and bigger problems with bigger consequences. Okay. So this is something that is important, especially in certain careers. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to accept versus accept. This one, I have a good trick that hopefully will stick with you all. But first, let's go ahead and talk about accept. So to accept something means to receive or agree to. Okay. So I accept your apology, or I accept your homework. I accept to continue to be the best teacher I possibly can be for my students, right? Accept is talking about like receiving something or agreeing to something. It's something that you are okay with, okay? Accept, right? EXCEPT is talking about excluding, right? So excluding or other than is what accept means. So if we go ahead and look at this example, everyone except John came to the party, okay? So this accept needs to be used here because this accept means that other than John, right? Everyone else was there. Everyone except, if we were to use this except John came to party, it would not make sense, right? Because he was not receiving anything, he was not agreeing to anything. If anything, right, we're talking about exclusion of John at this party because he was not there. Okay, so the trick, as I just mentioned, except when it's EXCEPT, I match it to excluding. So EX, right, which means to not have there. To exclude something means to deny something or access, or right, to just not allow in, to be excluded. Okay, so that's how I'm able to kind of remember it. And now what I want you to do is write a sentence using both accept and accept correctly. Okay, so accept meaning to receive or agree to something, and accept meaning excluding or other than. In one sentence, go ahead, give it your best shot, write a sentence that uses both of these confusables. All right, so for actual words that are confusables, I am done kind of explaining. There are other confusables I didn't touch on, but those were the major ones that I think are important for you all to know. And so, kind of just a quick strategy I have for you all is to kind of just create memorable associations, right? So, accept and exclude both start with the EX, right? When they mean to like deny something or exclude something. There, when there's an I in it, right? That means that there's a possession, like I own something. Contractions when there's an apostrophe, right? You are, they are, it is, right? So create memorable associations. That's something that's been beneficial for me, and I'm sure will be beneficial for you. Practice using confusables in context. The only way you can really become great at something and really master something is by practicing, is by making mistakes, right? And kind of trying and attempting to continue to grow. And then reading, right, is something that undeniably will help you with confusables, but also with every grammar skill that we have gone over so far. Um, Kind of just putting it all together and wrapping up this lesson. Um, Confusables are something that you are going to encounter for the rest of your life, right? So it's good to master them early on. So review the confusables we've discussed on Schoology. There's a worksheet that's going to kind of test your skills. And then also on Quill, there is a whole bunch of activities assigned with confusables kind of as the overall theme. Okay. So just as a reminder, mastering confusables, it takes time and a whole bunch of practice. There are still adults that use the wrong uh, spelling of a word because, once again, these are confusing. But it is something that is worthwhile of mastering, okay? So I hope you learned something from this, and I hope as we continue to practice, this is something we'll get even better at.